Buy me God of War or go to hell. That's what the kids used to say when they wanted a video game. Because God of War is all muscles and violence and tearing monsters' arms off and stabbing them through the neck with their own arseholes. It's a nightmare for anxious parents who'd instead prefer their kids just played Lee Carvello's putting challenge. But in 2018, God of War matured a bit. Kratos retired from inserting his fiery blades into Olympian ass, and he settled down. He had a son and made a fresh start, living a quiet life in a log cabin in the chilly north. Then one day, there was a knock at the cabin door. Big mistake. The cabin is destroyed, and Kratos is dragged out of retirement, and he and his boy get tangled up with some key characters from Norse mythology and embark on an adventure through the 9 realms, with Kratos swinging his icy axe into Norse ass while simultaneously doing a cracking job of raising his son, in what turned out to be one of the most captivating, intriguing, and downright coolest flipping games of the generation. And now, the sequel, God of War Ragnarok, has gone and improved on that first experience in every way. In my mind, it's an utterly flawless masterpiece. I don't even share some people's complaints about the characters being too eager with advice on how to solve puzzles. I don't care. If you know how I'm supposed to solve this puzzle, shout it out. Let's get this shit done, come on. Still got to finish Elden Ring here. But man, the way this game feels to play. From stomping on pickups to smashing crates, every action has such clout. The swing of your axe, you feel the weight of combat just as much as you feel the weight of treasure chest lids. Makes your thumbs feel brawny. But it's not just the gameplay, everything is executed perfectly. The sound, the visuals, the story, the performances. I've grown an emotional attachment to a severed head. However, there was one tiny thing that stood out to me, and it's the squeezing through tight gaps animation. Yeah, of course, we all know that it's there to mask a load. No big revelation and no big deal really, because it's not that I hate having to wait 2 seconds for Kratos to squeeze through a gap. It's not about the load time at all, or the momentary dip in pace, or anything like that. It's about the question I ask myself every time it happens. And that question is God of War Ragnarok a missed opportunity? And the answer, of course, is no, because God of War Ragnarok is a perfect game, so how can it be a missed opportunity? But let's just stick a pin in that for the moment, because I find the squeezing through gap animation interesting for several reasons. 1, because of how it's a device born from a hardware limitation, and 2, because of how frequently it appears in this game, the big flagship PlayStation 5 holiday release. And finally, I find it interesting because in a video presentation Sony made about the new PlayStation 5 hardware back in March 2020, I remember so vividly lead system architect Mark Cerny talking specifically about these particular issues and how the PlayStation 5's new SSD will eliminate the need for this filler, as he describes it. So, to quote Mark Cerny, who, by the way, I could listen to talk spec for hours, he's got such a calming way of talking. You should check out his presentations if you haven't already. He's like the Bob Ross of system architecture, but he looks like if Garth didn't meet Wayne, but instead became a tech genius. But then I also get the feeling that Cerny's an incredible drummer too. Anyway, to paraphrase a quote from Mark Cerny, the primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. All those tight gaps and twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. Now, with that in mind, the SSD sounds like a vital, pivotal addition to the console hardware. Not some gimmick or empty marketing promise that often comes along with the release of new consoles. We know all about those. I'm sure you all remember the Wii U was going to offer a second screen, an additional gamepad they would sell separately for dual gamepad experiences. The idea was ditched almost immediately when it became apparent they couldn't find enough stuff for the first gamepad to do, let alone a second one. And who could forget the Xbox One reveal and the promise of TV, sports, always online, #deal with it. And we'll never forget the PS3's infamous failed social hub PlayStation Home, but perhaps that's a bad example because that's definitely coming back in a major way, I guarantee it. But the SSD isn't a gimmick. It's not some slick feature that looks super stylish and cool and you can't wait to try it, but in reality you never really find a use for it, like the handle on a GameCube. No, the SSD actually works. But at this point, however, it does sort of remain a promise that's largely unfulfilled. Because let's face it, at its core, Ragnarok is a PS4 game. But to be fair, the PS5 version is a PS4 game that's been polished right up to the tits. I recall an analogy regarding the development of cross-generation titles, and it likened it to making a cake. It's easier to add icing and decoration than it is to take it off. And so they had to make the Ragnarok cake fit in the PS4 oven and then add all the PS5 sprinkles on after. And by the sounds of it, to be fair, they really pushed the PS4 oven to the limits to bake the Ragnarok cake. But they had to do it this way because of the sheer amount of people with PS4s. Of course, you're going to want to make your game available to the most amount of people possible, which is fine. It'd be a dubious decision to deny a tentpole release to such a massive install base, unless you're a company that believes in generations. And Sony did eventually forewarn us that we'd see more cross-platform titles than we were expecting. But the thing is, the PS4 hardware will be 10 years old next year. That's old enough to buy cigarettes in some countries. And the PS5 is 2 years old now, as is that Mark Cerny presentation, which I should add was called The Road to PS5. Trouble is, after 2 years, it feels like we're still on that road. We haven't reached the PS5 yet. When Mark Cerny talks about the SSD and how it will eliminate this filler of gap squeezing, long elevator rides and winding corridors, he references his work on Jak 2 and how all the twisty passages of the Level Haven City are there for a reason. The game is 20 years old, he says, but not much has changed since then. So to think of the PS5 and the SSD and dispensing with this reliance on rusty spinning media, and dispensing with this distracting filler, and instead granting complete freedom to developers to create games in any way they see fit, and then to see Kratos squeeze through a gap to stealthily load the next scene, it makes me wonder, is God of War Ragnarok a missed opportunity? Wouldn't it have been amazing to see Ragnarok, of all games, take full advantage of the PS5's power? What could Sony Santa Monica have achieved without the limitations of the PS4? Well, I've no idea. Kratos' new frontier into Odin's His House turned out pretty flipping well as it is. The over-the-shoulder, one-hold shot type deal, coupled with the stellar performances of the cast, is so engaging. As is the brutal flow of combat, the sound design, and well, just everything. And Ragnarok must be a pretty decent game if the only complaint I have about it is that every time I see Kratos squeeze through a gap, I think about all the things I've just talked to you about for the last 7 minutes. And that's only because Sony put that stuff in my head with their own marketing. But yeah. God of War Ragnarok, I mean, it's a masterpiece. What else could they have done? Made it open world, I guess? With like shield surfing and stuff? Maybe a bowling mini game with Mimir's head? Yeah, that would be cool. Oh well.